Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die, where my goal is to give you evidence that although our bodies will disappear, we survive physical death. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. Today on the show, we have the lovely Beth Spann Mank. Beth is a former elementary school teacher and freelance writer. She has authored over 45 teacher resource books and over 75 readers for children. She is also a puppeteer and a storyteller. She is the founder of Learning with Puppets, an online educational membership site for parents and teachers of young children. So why is she on We Don't Die radio show? Well, 2.5 years ago, her husband Paul passed into the spirit world from pancreatic cancer. Since then, she has looked for evidence of the afterlife, and what she has found is amazing. In fact, Beth is a co-author of a forthcoming book on the subject and will be a speaker at the upcoming Afterlife Symposium, with the title of her talk being Romance Across the Veil. Beth has teamed up with author William Murray, whose wife passed from cancer. Together, they have created a Facebook group and have regular online group meetings for those wishing to have a trans-dimensional romance with their loves. Her website is learningwithpuppets.com. Beth Spann Mank, welcome to We Don't Die Radio.
Sandra, thank you so much for having me on your show. I am so honored.
I feel the same.
I'm honored for many reasons because you have so many stellar stars on your show, so many fabulous voices. But also I'm honored because you're someone who everyone admires. I have to say I've been in the afterlife community for a little while now, for a few years now, and I have never heard a disparaging word about Sandra Champlain. Everyone loves you because you are sincere and warm and humorous and supportive and understanding. And I'm just so very jazzed to be on your show, very honored.
Oh, I feel the same way. Let me just interrupt you for a second, because I know you are a real person with a real story. And even though neither one of us are, superstar celebrities in the world, we've both experienced our own grief, and we're here to share. And I think that's what makes our stories real, believable, and that we can make a difference with others. So I feel the same way about you.
Yes, well, thank you so much. Like many of your listeners who come to you, I think most people come to learning about the afterlife and are intrigued by the We Don't Die message because they have, quote unquote, lost someone to death.
Right.
And my own parents have passed, and a very dear aunt of mine passed, and I was sad when they did, but nothing prepared me for the grief I felt when my husband passed. I felt like a train hit me or a wrecking ball hit me. I've never felt that level of pain. So my story with my husband, Paul, goes like this. I was born in Dublin, Ireland, and adopted into a family in Buffalo, New York. I grew up in Buffalo, and when I was in high school, I met Paul, and I was instantly smitten. We just got along so well. And we started dating. And on our very first date, he said to me, Beth, this is 1970, to give you an idea of the time frame. He said to me, Beth, I really like you. And I want to go steady with you, which is made my heart flutter. And I want to exchange high school rings, which is something we did back in the day. But he said, I'm only 17, and I'm expecting to probably go away to college, which was really unheard of in our little industrial city of Buffalo, New York. Nobody went away to college. But Paul was very smart. He was our high school valedictorian. So he was smart and funny and adorable, and I was just smitten. And he said to me, I just don't want you to get hung up on me too much. And I said, okay.
Right.
And I proceeded to completely fall in love with him.
Yes.
And I wasn't really even with him all that long. It was only really several months. But in that time, we just laughed our heads off. We had the best time. And then one day he came to me, he walked me home from school, and he held out his hand, and in his hand was my high school ring, which was an indication, I'm giving this back to you.
No.
This is it for us. And I gave him back his ring. And I don't know where this came from, Sandra, really and truly. I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. Of course, I sobbed, and I was so upset and so sad, and hugged him and everything. And I watched him. He went home, and I looked out my window and saw him walking away, literally and figuratively. And I thought to myself, I'm not upset. I'm not angry with him. I don't harbor any ill will against him, because if you love someone unconditionally, you want for them what they want for themselves. And if Paul wanted to date other people, even though I wanted to just be with him, I had to allow him his path. Mm-hmm. I had to let him go with love. And that's what I did. I let him go with love. And we were neighborhood kids, so I would still see him at school. And then we graduated, and I went to the local university, and he did as well. And further down the line, one day he came to me and he said, I'm thinking, this is, I don't know, a year or so later, I'm thinking, would you like to go out to the movies? And again, my heart leapt. I said, yes, yes, yes. And the next day he came and said, I can't take you out to the movies. I'm still not ready for that one person. And so I had to let him go again. And a number of times this happened. And then eventually I married someone, and he married someone, and I moved to Long Island. And my first husband was a lovely man, really lovely, and I was nice to him, and he was nice to me, and we never had an argument, but I didn't love him. And one day, we went to counseling. This is a funny side story. He and I went to counseling, and the counselor said to me, well, what's wrong with him? And I said, well, there's nothing wrong with him. And she said, well, there's got to be something wrong with him. I said, no, there's nothing wrong with him. There really wasn't. But one night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and I went out in our little living room. We had a beautiful home. I went out in our little living room, and I thought, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. And he came out. This is husband number one. He came out and said to me, what's wrong? And I said, well, I love you, but I don't love you the way a wife's supposed to love a husband. And he said, I know. And that was it. And the next day we started splitting up our house and selling everything, going through the process of splitting up and all that. And that was no children though, so that was fine. After that, I met husband number two, a man named Frank, who I'm still friendly with, and he and I have two beautiful young adult children together. Now they're young adults, and that relationship didn't work out either. And eventually, online, before Facebook, I connected with Paul. And this was 31 years after we had split up. And instantly, all the love came back. Instantly, within an instant. But I was in a marriage, he was in a marriage, and we could not be together. We didn't even live it. We didn't live states and states apart. And so finally, he was the one who said, we cannot communicate like this anymore. And so we didn't. We didn't call or email or anything for years. And my husband and I split up, and we were very friendly. We bought two houses across the street from each other. And eventually what happened with Paul was he had a heart attack. And in the ambulance, he said to himself, if I don't leave this marriage, I'll never see her again. And so by then his children were adults, and they were out of the house, graduated from college, and so he left his marriage, and then we were together. And we were together 10 years. And at first it was a long-distance relationship with me on Long Island, being a writer, and he lived in Michigan. And we would see each other often because I would fly to be with him and bring work with me, or he would come to see me, or we would meet in Buffalo where we grew up because we both had family there still. And it was really, really wonderful. But my children were younger than his, and I couldn't leave Long Island to be with him because they were still teenagers. So eventually they were old enough, and I moved to be with Paul, the love of my life. But I wasn't even here in Michigan a year before he was diagnosed with the cancer. And then we had an 18-month cancer journey, as I called it, and then he passed. And again, I felt flattened. I told my two children, who I love so dearly, I said to them, I don't even want to be here. I was not suicidal like some people report, but there was nothing that held any interest for me in this world initially. And what I did, Sandra, was I got things like your book and Zamet's book and Cyrus Kirkpatrick's book and on and on and on, book after book after book after book. And I would lay in bed for months reading books about the afterlife and watching videos about the afterlife. and listening to radio shows like yours about the afterlife. And little by little by little, I began to trust that this mountain of evidence that is out there, that I wasn't even aware of at all. And I don't understand how people cannot be aware of it because it is so ginormous. But most people that I know, even my family members, will say, well, we don't really know what happens when we die. And while I would venture that we may not know exactly every detail about what happens when we die, it's like standing, I just read this quote, it's like standing at the bottom of a mountain and looking at the mountain and saying, I don't see a mountain. Mm-hmm. Once you see it, once it's there in front of you, it's impossible to ignore the huge amount of evidence. Mm-hmm. You might say to yourself, well, that medium, that's probably fraudulent. Or that, I don't know, that afterlife, that near-death experience, that's probably hallucination. You might be able to dismiss out of hand a few things here and there, but it's impossible to dismiss everything. Mm-hmm. You would have to be, I don't want to call names, but I would, in my own personal opinion, you'd have to be, I don't know what you'd have to be to ignore everything.
Yeah. Well, you're talking to people that I think are on the same page as you, because many people have listened to hundreds of shows of mine, plus read lots of books and other shows. But I want to ask you a question before we go any further, if I may. When you got reunited with Paul, how was that relationship? Was it, because he really sounded like a young man that didn't want to commit in the earlier days. Was it full-blown, head over heels for both of you, huge romance, deep love when you finally did connect as adults?
It was something I'd never experienced before. And both of my first husbands, my husband number one, husband number two, were very lovely people. I'm still friendly with both of them. My ex-husband, like I said, we lived across the street from each other. So these were not, I realize people go through acrimonious, very difficult relationships. My relationships were not like that, but they weren't, I was empty in both of them. I was in relationships, but I felt alone in the relationship. And I'm not blaming anybody for that. It was just the nature of the relationship. When I was with Paul, we often looked at each other and said, this is amazing. You know how there's like 1 billion books on the market about how to work on your relationship? And yes. I'm not discounting those. I'm not. But when I was in my marriages, especially to Frank, because we had children, and I care for Frank. I love Frank. And I adore my children. We both do. He's a good dad. He's a wonderful person. I used to go in Borders Books, which was still open at the time, and sit down with a big cup of coffee and take every single relationship book off the shelf. And I used to go through them and read them, like a library of relationship books, trying to make this marriage work. And when I was with Paul, there was no work involved, ever. It was easy peasy. And we often said to each other, this is an amazing thing. How is it possible that we don't even try and we just have the best time always? Yeah. And it was not without some challenges, right? Because when I was on Long Island and Paul was here in Michigan, my writing business, it was when the economy crashed, and my writing business for teachers and children, many of the companies I worked with were shuttering their doors, or at least that division of making books for teachers. And so I was very successful I wasn't Stephen King successful, but I was relatively successful as a writer. I made 6 figures and was able to work at home and be with my kids. So I was very fortunate, Sandra, in that. And I loved writing about education. I just love working with kids. So I was very, very fortunate. But as fortunate as I was, it all went away. And I didn't see it at first because projects would go away here and there. But finally, it got to the point where I was in my little home on Long Island going through the couch cushions looking for coins to buy food. I am not kidding. My ex-husband had lent me money. I had cashed in all of my retirement savings to try and keep my house afloat. And this was very, very difficult. And at one point, I talked with Paul on the phone, long distance. He was in Michigan. I was on Long Island. And he said to me, I think you want to be with your kids. In other words, what he was saying was, I don't think you want to be with me. I think you want to be with your children, because my focus was on keeping the house and being with the kid. And I said, and my kids were in their 20s by then, but they weren't fully launched. You know, they weren't able to own their own house and have their own. They were still in college, and you know, they were still cooking. And I said to him, and he didn't say it in a mean way. He said, you know, I just think you want to stay there. I said, no, I want to be with you. And what's beautiful about that, and so of course that's when my house went into foreclosure. I went bankrupt, and that's when Paul moved me here. But I love that part of the story because it harkens back to the time when we were teenagers, where I said to him, if that's your path and you need to go date other people, then go date other people, even though I don't want you to. And he was basically saying, if your path is to stay with your kids on Long Island and be with them and worry about them, then do that. And I just thought that they were both examples of unconditional love.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. Those two words, unconditional love.
Yes. And my son, who I was most worried about, he was 21. He just went down the street and lived with his dad. But he said to me, Mom, when you go to Michigan, because I said, I was very torn. And he said, Mom, when you go to Michigan, he said, just remember this, Paul's a good guy and he loves you. And if you go there and complain or you don't fit in or whatever, you're going to make it miserable for him and yourself. He said, I want you to go there. I want you to volunteer, get a job, do whatever you need to do to fit in. He said, because if you blow this with him and he doesn't want to be with you anymore because you're so complaining all the time, he said, don't come crying to me when you're old and alone.
You have a very wise child there.
Right. And I have to tell you one other thing. The second Paul was diagnosed, the moment he said to me, I have pancreatic cancer, and I knew that was a death sentence.
Right.
All of that seemed unimportant. And I talked to my daughter, and I said, oh my God, I was so worried about you and your brother. And she said to me, Mommy, when a true crisis comes into your life, your true priorities come to the fore. That's what she said. And
very
I said,
wise
wow.
daughter. Yes.
You know, so both of my kids were just supportive and loving. And it told me any worry that we have is not important. It's not even real. So I plunged after Paul passed, and you know, we made the best of his journey. One of the very last things he said to me, Sandra, one of the very, very last things he said, and he was so desperately ill. He literally died a couple of days later, so ill. He said to me, we were sitting on his hospital bed, and he had all these, you know what, tubes coming out of every part of his body, and he was so desperately ill by then, and I was just sitting side by side, our legs dangling over the edge of the bed. People, when they're dying, they're often restless at night. They don't sleep well, and they're up and down and all over the place. And he just very quietly said, you know, I think this whole thing has brought us even closer together. And to me, that was worth a million I love yous, because that's really what it was. The cancer journey, as much as it was an unwanted journey, there's something to appreciate in it, which was that we grew even closer together. I appreciated him more than I ever did before. And then when he passed, even more. Yeah. And so
I get it.
Yes, there are those gifts in that.
My dad passed of cancer, as you know, and those last 5 months, although it wasn't, husband-wife relationship, talk about appreciation and that love for each other, and even getting to know who we are and what we're capable of as human beings. I wouldn't do it any other way.
Well, that's another thing, is that when Paul was first diagnosed, a family member said to me, well, what are you going to do? And I had been working I'm a teacher. I'd been working in a school here. And I said, well, I'm not going back to work, because he was diagnosed in the summer. I said, I'm not going back in the fall because I want to, I want to spend every minute with him. He said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm his caregiver. And this was in the beginning when Paul did not look ill. And the family member said, well, what do you mean caregiving? You're not doing anything for him. And I said, well, I go to his doctor appointments with him. And he said something very crude that I cannot even repeat here, but he basically said, well, yeah, what are you going to have to do when you have to do something unsavory to help him? And I said, well, I guess I'll just do it. But I laid awake all night thinking, I've never been with a desperately ill person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Am I up to the? I don't know what. Oh my God! I never even thought of that.
I bet you rose to the occasion, didn't you? I bet you did.
Not only that, but I think, and I don't think I'm extraordinary in that. I think I love Paul. Still continue to love him so much that you don't even think twice about it. It's anything you can do. Anything that they want, anything to make them comfortable, anything to help them. And I'm sure you were the same. Everybody's the same pretty much, I think.
That's love.
And so when looking back on it, I thought, oh my gosh, I never would have thought that I would have been able to do the things I needed to do to help him. Right. And this is a little tip for other people who go through this, because so often, even in the group that we run online, our Zoom group and stuff, people regret. They say, oh, I wish I had done this or that or the other thing. And you know what, Sandra, I decided I wasn't going to do that to myself. I was already had enough pain from the grief. I was not going to go back and rake myself over the coals and there were a couple little things I would have done differently, not enormous things, but a few things I wish I had done differently. And I gave myself a break with that. I thought, well, all right, I didn't think of it back then, so be it. And I let it go. And I didn't beat myself up. And anything I forgot to tell Paul, there really wasn't too much. But I just talk to him all the time now. Mm-hmm. So it's not a lost opportunity.
Which, Mary Beth, I want to, because time goes by very quickly on these shows, as we both know, and I want to, first of all, acknowledge you for that, and for anyone who is sitting now with regrets about what they should have done differently, shouldn't have done, should have said, shouldn't have said. It's all part of the grieving process, and one thing I firmly believe is at the time we did the best job we could, and it doesn't serve us to go back with what we should or shouldn't have done. And our minds can be overbearing and create habits for regrets and thinking and all that stuff. So if you can, try to take a moment, be in the present moment, or push that thought out of your mind and trust that you did the very best at that time. But Mary Beth, I want to get into some of the things that first of all, that you're writing about and that you're going to talk about at the upcoming symposium, and some of the things that had you start really believing that Paul was still with you. Can we move into that conversation?
Yes. The first time I realized it. Well, first of all, for your listeners, something that's helpful to me, for those listeners who may or may not be familiar with this, is I had a little bit of background with this, because for years before this happened, before I even worried about anything about death, I had been listening to Abraham Hicks, and Abraham Hicks makes afterlife stuff. Well, actually, Abraham Hicks does not focus on afterlife. Abraham is a group of non-physical teachers that are channeled through Esther Hicks, and they're very popular and they're very easy to listen to. And mostly they give advice for how to live your day-to-day earth life.
Right. They don't very profound. Yeah.
Yes. And but really, the message is just feel good, because if you're putting yourself in a feel-good place, everything else falls into place. I think when you feel good, you're connected to, as they call it, source energy, pure positive energy. And when you feel good, you feel like helping other people. You feel loving. You feel, it doesn't do us any good at all to wallow in pain, to be martyrs. I mean, pain is part of our human experience, but I use it as a little temple bell to say, oh, wait a minute, I don't like feeling like this. How can I help myself feel better? And that's really basically Abraham's message. Along the way, they always talk about the fact that there is no death. There is no death. We continue on, but they talk about it in very broad brush strokes. And so I had that in the back of my mind, that there is no death. I sort of knew that, but I didn't have to really think about it until Paul passed. And then I was desperate for where is he? Where is he? And one time, a few days after he passed, I was at the sink brushing my teeth, and all of a sudden I felt like a whoosh of sensibility of Paul. And it wasn't a memory. It wasn't like I was remembering that time we went out to dinner or that time that we went on the trip to Hawaii. It wasn't like that. It was just like whoosh, like, oh, wow. But instantly, as my Zoom room partner, William Murray, would say, because everybody has that experience at one point or another, it instantly triggers the missing of them.
Sure.
So you get that love feeling, and then within 1/1,000,000 of a second, you're bursting into tears.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I liked that feeling. And so what I did was I began to notice when it happened more and more. And sometimes it would happen from a memory. On purpose, I would do a memory, like I would remember Paul or something we did together. And other times it would just be spontaneous. And I love the spontaneous ones because it didn't come from at least my conscious awareness. So I began to, notice that more and more and see different things, see different signs from him. And one of the strongest signs I had from him was I couldn't remember the dress I had worn when we finally could be together, as he would say, street legal. I couldn't remember. And I'm thinking, how could I forget what I wore? That must have been so, I remember the day, I remember the moment. I can't remember what I wore. And I was from Michigan, visiting a friend on Long Island, staying at a friend's home. And when I had moved to Michigan, I had given away a lot of my things, and I had given her a lot of my clothes. And I looked in her closet. Actually, I was in her spare bedroom, and I looked in her closet to see if I could find, the dress in question, and I couldn't find it. And she said to me, Mary Beth, my son and his family are coming over. They're going on a trip for 2 weeks across the country, and they're coming over. So, and I knew her son and his wife and their kids, but I hadn't seen them in a while. And you know how kids shoot up like weeds. And in walks the family, and the daughter, who is about 13, is wearing the dress. Because I had given her, my friend, the dress. She had given it to her granddaughter. And it was just a little sheath dress. And I was like, oh, that's it. There's the dress. The odds of me being there out of town, her family coming over at that moment, they were going to go out of town for 2 weeks. The odds of the granddaughter wearing the dress are so astronomical. It just took my breath away. Mm-hmm. So, and I have like a book of those different things like that. The other thing I did though in my travels was I looked at I found my way to Victor and Wendy Zamet's Afterlife report, and their Friday report. And in their report, they all often put videos in that report, and there was a video. And it said it was about a woman and a man who communicated across the veil. And I had never heard of anything like that. And so I clicked on it, and that led me to the work of medium Leslie Flint. So can we talk about that?
You bet we can. Yeah, we had Carl Jackson Barnes on once last year, who opened us up, anyone who heard that episode about the world of Leslie Flint. And I was just floored, inspired, goosebumps the whole time. So I love that we're going to talk about this. Yes, so you'll have to definitely in this description talk about who Leslie Flint was and the special kind of mediumship.
Yeah, so this is really what my talk at the AREI symposium is going to be. And again, I tell people I'm not an expert. I'm not, I'm just like you. I just go to the website and listen to the audios. So I listened to this clip that was on the Afterlife report, and it was Dinshaw Nanji, Dr. Dinshaw Nanji, speaking with his wife, Annie Nanji, and she is in spirit and he is here. Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated by this. I couldn't believe this. And I began to look to find out more about who this medium was and who these people were and all about this. And Leslie Flint, for those people, your listeners who may or may not know, he was what they call a direct voice medium. Now, most mediums that we know were they're, say, the Long Island medium or John Edward, popular mediums. They're what we call mental mediums. They receive mental messages and impressions and all that.
Right.
Leslie Flint was different. Leslie Flint was a direct voice medium, which means he didn't receive message mentally. Well, he may have, but that wasn't his specialty. The direct voice piece of it is not a mental mediumship. It's also not where you're channeling like Esther Hicks does, where you bring voices through and you use your own voice to speak the spirit's words. It's not like that. You're sitting in a room and the voice of the spirits come into the room, and everyone in the room hears them, including the medium. So, and Leslie Flint did not sit in trance. He was fully aware and awake. He did sit in the dark. He did have, and this is part, I can read about it. I can never 100% understand it, but he did have the ectoplasm that a lot of physical mediums have come out of him. But he was aware and awake and would converse with the spirits as well as everyone else in the room. And he was alive between 1911 and he passed in 1994. So he had a very long life. He was into his 80s. And he had his first seance at age 17. And he began to develop under the tutelage of a woman named Edith Munden, who he eventually married. She was older, but she was like his mentor and his friend, and he really loved her for that. And after World War II broke out in 1933, after that, his work began to take off. And the thing about it that I've read is that during times of war, World War I and World War II, when there's a great amount of death, people's interest in the afterlife really spike.
That's right.
And so, yes, and so he had many, many sitters. Interestingly, though, he never charged a penny for his seances, where he would sit with a number of sitters.
Don't you love that? Doesn't that speak to the... And he's also, I'm sure you know this, one of the most tested mediums that lived on planet Earth. I mean, tested by so many to make sure he wasn't making those voices appear, that he wasn't like a ventriloquist, and the real voices of people's loved ones appeared in midair, so to speak. So
right. And Carl Jackson Brown, we're Brown. I mean
Barnes. That's all right.
I always say Jackson Brown. Brown.
That's okay.
Never mind. It's kind of an inside joke, but Carl Jackson Barnes, he recently reached out to me and he said, "Mary Beth, listen to this Leslie Flint recording," and there was nothing. It was him and another person sitting and waiting for half an hour, and no one showed up. And I love that because it just showed that he couldn't conjure up people. He wasn't imitating anything. This was really real.
That's right.
So there. And the other thing I love about the Leslie Flint Educational Trust is it's on the website. People can go there. You can listen to the recordings for free. They're available for free. Now, not every single one of Leslie Flint's seances were recorded, but in the 1950s, so this is about 20 years lost, but in the 1950s, there were two sitters, George Woods and Betty Green, who began recording them because by then they had some recording equipment. And we now have over 1,000 seances recorded. There are 32 of what they call the Aninanji recordings on the Trust website. And there are, Carl told me, probably 30 more. The recordings are on tape, and they're very fragile. And I'm trying to think of the name. Wait, I have a name. Jack Terrence Andrews over in Arizona painstakingly turns these tapes into digitized recordings, and it's a really a labor of love. So anyway,
and people can
first recording.
Let me just say, people can find this website, leslieflint.com, and it's a great place to learn more about Leslie Flint and listen to thousands of audios, and you'll hear people in their voices, even some celebrities as they lived, communicating with their loved ones. So let's talk about the Nanjis. Yeah,
so I listened to the Nanji recording and was fascinated, and then I went to the website and I saw all these recordings there's many other people, some famous people, some not so famous people, but I was interested in the Nanjis because that was a husband and wife. And they were soulmates, and they were romantic with each other. And I wanted to listen to all of them. The problem was that out of the 30, I think there were maybe 2 that were transcribed. And I found, first, number one, I'm hard of hearing. Number 2, because it was not just one person coming to speak with sitters, in other words, one spirit person coming in, it was Dinshaw Nanji speaking with his wife, and then there was Mr. Flint, and often his spiritual sidekick Mickey, and sometimes they're all talking at the same time, and it's really hard for me to understand what they're saying, and they have accents. So I contacted. I'm not quite sure if I contacted Jack Terrence Andrews or Carl Jackson Barnes about this, but I said to them, "Why are there not more transcriptions? It makes it so much easier to listen and read along." And they said, because they can't be recordings can't be put in what there's software now that just does it automatically because of the accents and because of the condition of the recordings. They're not really all that great. They're not, they try to make them as cleaned up as possible, but they're old. And they said they have to be done by hand by volunteers, and we don't have volunteers. And I said, I'll volunteer to do it. And so I started doing it. And man, oh man, is it tedious. Let me just tell you, because I try to get them exact because the spirit voices and this historic seance, and it would take me for maybe a minute of recording. It could take me like 2 hours to get a tiny, teeny bit. Each seance is about a half an hour long. But in doing that transcription, I felt like I really began to know these people. I felt like they were friends of mine. And I recognized in them, even though the things that they discuss are different than what Paul and I discussed and all that, the love and the devotion and the excitement that they had just to be communicating with each other was something that was very, very familiar to me. And it gave me such hope that this would be true for Paul and me. And it is so very believable. And the other thing I loved about it, I always say to people that Dr. Dinshaw Nanji, who was a chemist from India, and that's significant because often scientists are not so willing to step into our community. Mm-hmm. And so he was a chemist, but he was desperate to connect with his daughter, And we have found out that our other good friend, Stig Burlston, if I'm pronouncing his mm-hmm. last name correctly, he's from Sweden. He said, I can do some background research, and he found Dinshaw's daughter from a first marriage, who is now older. But she said when Annie passed, my father was so grief-stricken, I couldn't even live with him. I moved out of the house. He was so beside himself with grief. And as you listen to the recordings through the years, there's 15 years worth of recordings. Dinshaw met with Mr. Flint twice a year.
Wow.
And sometimes they would sit twice in that meeting, like 2 days in that mm-hmm. meeting. So you can see his own grief lifting off of him. And through the years, through the conversations. And toward the end, he's saying, oh, yes, I'm an 80-year-old man, and people don't even believe this of me. Don't I look good? Mm-hmm. And you can see that, as long as he knows she's there, as long as we know our loved ones are there, and they're happy, and they're healthy, and they love us, and we will be reunited in the relationship we are familiar with. Like, I don't want to cross over and find out Paul's my uncle. I want him to be my lover, my husband, yes. my sweetheart. As long as we know that continues in that way, and that's what the Nanji recordings reassured me of, then I can go on. And in the recordings, which there's like so much stuff to talk, so many references that it would be impossible, obviously, to bring your listeners every single piece of it. But I do know that people are most concerned when you lose someone. You're most concerned about a number of things. Mm-hmm. One of them being, will they be, when I cross over? Will my son be my son? Will my husband be my husband? Will my mother be my mother? And the answer is, from the Nanjis, yes. The relationship here continues. It continues right now as a transdimensional relationship, as William Murray coined it. Mm-hmm. And when we get over there, it continues the way it is. So I love them because when I listen to the recording, Sandra, I pick up on kind of 4 different categories of conversations that this husband and wife have with each other.
Okay.
And the first is that they just have ordinary husband-wife banter. Some of the people who have listened to the tapes, they say it's almost like you're eavesdropping on them, in the privacy of their home. And for example, this cracked me up. One day she said to him, that hat you're wearing, I'm paraphrasing, but she says to him, that hat you're wearing. And he says, yes, she says, well, it's just so old. I want you to get a new hat. And he says, no, it's fine. And she said, no, it's so old. I want you to go out and get yourself a new hat, and that will be from me. And isn't that like so typical of so many marriages where people say, Oh, you're wearing that today?
Yeah, which shows, Mary Beth, that she's right there with them. I mean,
Yes,
it's easy to think our loved ones are off in heaven somewhere far away, but they're right
right.
here with us, just vibrating in a
It's
different frequency. We can't see them,
yeah,
but they're very aware, correct, of what we're doing.
exactly, exactly. And then she always asks him, a number of times in the recordings, and this is true of real life too, when you live with people, is that the same conversations will pop up again and again. And so throughout the number of different recordings, every so often she'll say to him things like, "You're keeping my things." Like he hasn't removed her things. As she says, "My bits and pieces," and he says, "I'll never part with any of them." And she says, "Oh, you don't. It's okay." And he says, "No, when I die, that'll be time for the other people can get rid of them. Then I won't need them. But right now," he says, "I often bury my face in your clothes and I smell them." I mean, how many of us have done that with a loved one? And it's so these little reports, even though they're little tiny threads into their life, it for me, it made me feel like we're all the same.
Yes,
we know how many people have felt this. Most everybody, unless you pass when you're a baby, most everybody feels this kind of thing. And then Annie's very funny, and she also tells Mr. Flint that he eats too much and he's too fat. And everybody laughs in the stands. Ha, 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 ha. And she says, "No, I mean it." She almost says, "I mean it in a good way, really." It's the seances are funny. They're upbeat. There's nothing heavy or desperate or horrible about them. So, and one of my favorite quotes, he says to her, Dinshaw, or Dinu as his nickname is, he says to her, "When I come to see you, in other words, when I pass and I'm with you, will I be able to feel your kiss on my lips?" And she says, of course you will." She said, "Our world is as solid to us as yours is to you." And I love that. I love that. It's so beautiful. And for me, it implies even more than a kiss. People want more than that. They want the full, whole erotic experience with a beloved loved one, a romantic loved one. And so she's reassuring him, "Of course, darling, of course, that's the way it is." And she says she comes to him and she touches his hand and she, or she knocks on the wall. She does all these different things that people report, signs from their loved one. Also, she says, interestingly, that if he goes shopping and he sees something he would have purchased for her if she were here, but he doesn't because she's not. She says, "I see you shopping for me and I see you wanting to pick things for me. And I tell you, I am replicating them in our life here. And when you get here, you will see them."
Oh,
so
that's sweet.
That's kind of cool. So, yeah. So
it's a very real
every morning,
world, this spirit world.
Yes.
Very real.
Yes. Yes. And every morning I pour coffee. I pour 2 cups of coffee. If you were here right now, you'd see 2 cups of coffee on my table, one for Paul and one for me. And one time I'm pouring, and I sit and I talk to him, sometimes mentally and sometimes out loud. And one time, but of course, he doesn't drink his cup here. And I imagine he's having a cup in the afterlife. And one time I thought to myself, sometimes I drink his cup too, but sometimes I just pour it down the sink and I think, it's kind of a waste. And I had a reading, I'm not kidding you, with a medium online. I wasn't even talking to her. It was just in a chat room. And she was reading me. And she said, "He's bringing me this is my Paul. He's bringing me the smell of coffee. And he's saying it's not a waste." And she didn't even know what that meant.
Oh, that's great.
I know, isn't that cool? So a lot of the Annie Nanji and Dinshaw Nanji parallels to, what I'm experiencing in my life here. So when I pour Paul a cup of coffee, I imagine he is receiving that. A lot of people, I want to just make this point, that a lot of people who are grieving are looking for signs from their loved one. And sometimes on afterlife groups or I don't go on widow groups because they're just too sad. But I was for a while, and the widow groups, they're just so excruciatingly in pain, and they're like on cut glass, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm desperate for a sign. I don't get any sign." And what William Murray and I tell people is, know what? Don't worry about that so much. Just start by giving them signs. You know what I mean? It's the opposite. Like, pour the cup of coffee for them.
I love that.
Yes, go shopping and pick up something. Pick up, like, I don't know, some flowers or something, and say, these are for you. You don't even have to really buy them, or you could buy them and bring them home for him or her. And so it's really shifting it from and then once you begin to raise your own feelings and feel better, you will notice them because they are around you all the time. It's just that sometimes in grief we're so distracted and so upset and so sad, and we want them to appear sitting on our couch, and that's a rare thing. So it shifts it to, it gives you something, it empowers you to be able to do something yourself. Write them a letter.
Mary Beth, this is good. Very good. I want to be mindful of our time here just because I want to make sure we talk about what you're doing with William. But I have not heard it put this way ever in all these 270 some episodes. Give them a sign. And it really is the acting as if they're with you. Pour the cup of coffee. Whether you don't buy a gift, in your mind saying, this is what I have for you. And whether it's flowers, whether it is a gift. And I've heard Scott Milligan, who's a physical medium, say something similar or one of his people that speak through him say this, is that they get the gifts when we think it, when we present it. So being proactive, acting as if they're with you, talking to them, including them. And that does make us feel better. And in turn, when our vibrations are higher, and that's what I believe it takes for them to communicate with us. So I think you just said something like brilliant. And you may not realize how brilliant, but brilliant.
Sometimes it's the ordinary things. One of the women in our group, in our afterlife group, whose husband passed, and she's alone. She lives alone, and she's elderly, lovely woman, but her family's not on board with this. And according to her, they think she's, lost her crackers or whatever the expression is.
I think.
But she said she was
people think that
so sad and just walking around her house alone, empty, sobbing, desperately crying. She said screaming for her house, screaming. Mm-hmm. And so William and I, said to just talk to him. And she said, even though I felt silly all by myself, I did it. I talked aloud to him. And she said, I started feeling him. I really began to feel him around me. And she tells about she says, now I can tell he's sitting right here. I mean, so it does, it really does work to help you raise your vibration. And it's also not about just them giving to you. It's about you giving. So that's really,
a gold
really
mine.
Nice.
And just to recap a little, I hate to interrupt you, but I'm just being mindful here of everything we need to accomplish in a short period of time. You are speaking at the Afterlife Symposium, and for those that are there, if your true love is someone who is in the spirit world and you want to learn more about the Nanji recordings, what else has been communicated, how to yourself be in a good relationship with your loved one transdimensionally, you want to be sitting with Mary Beth. It'll be on the Friday, September 14th at 11:45 is when her speech will be it's called the Rattlers Room. But if you go to afterlifesymposium.org and you click on the 2018 schedule, you'll actually be able to see, all the different times where everybody's speaking. But you will go into this so much more in your speech and really let us know what life is like on the other side. But I love how we can be more in communication. But I do want to hear about your working with William, because I think not everybody's obviously going to get to the symposium, but I'd love to hear more about how you came together with William. And you had said something to me earlier about affirmations that William uses and how it impacts your grief, and talk about your Facebook group and your Zoom room.
If I may, just before I go there, I just want to close out with Ananji with one very wonderful quote that she said that I think is really, there's two things that I think is really helpful for people who are suffering the way I was suffering. One thing she said was he was talking about the fact that he went to a garden where they had, or park or something where they had been, and he was starting to get a little teary. Dinshaw was starting to get upset, and he remembered, and he's longing for her, even though he could talk to her. He's still longing. Something we would all, oh my God, we would all like give our right arm for. He had that, but it still wasn't enough. He wanted to be with her. And he says, I go to the spot where you were and I recall those precious moments. And she said, but they will come again. And they will be even more wonderful. Here, when you come, this is a quote, here, when you come, you will understand things I cannot possibly tell you because words I don't know. If you try to remember the wonderful things and the wonderful happenings we shared, here, it is so much more. When you come to me, that's all I care about. And one other time, this is to conclude the Annie Nanji thing. One other time, when every time she comes to him, she's all excited, and she always says, "Oh, what shall we talk about? She has this little Swedishy accent. What shall we talk about now?" Which I'm not good at imitating.
Yeah, you're just fine.
She says to him, "Oh my darling, I can think of nothing but I love you." But that is everything. And I think, oh my God, it was food for my soul. My God, my Paul is still there.
Right.
He's with me every day. And he's with me. He's waiting for me, and he's loving me. And that's what I want to reassure all of your readers, no matter who has passed, that is true for all of us. That is true for all of us. And, if you're someone who lost a husband or a sweetheart or a fiance or whatever, twin soul, go listen to the Annie Nanji. And I've done 5 of the transcripts, and we have a couple other people working on them as well. And it's just that they take forever.
I know, but this is all going to come together eventually in a book.
Yes. Well, that's our goal. Yes. So we're working on a book. All the people that I mentioned to date, and there's another woman. I didn't get a permission to mention her last name, but her name is Maria, and she's doing transcripts as well. But Jack and Carl and Stig and Maria and I were all working, and the book will be like a guidebook for the Nanjis, and to listen to them and understand what they're saying. And any of the proceeds will go back to the trust, because Jack curates the website. Of course, that costs money, and to all these things, things cost money, even with volunteers. And so we feel like this will be a help to people like me. So that's
most
good.
Definitely, because we can all map on our relationships, even though, it isn't our loved ones speaking through it, but you'll see how real they are. And also for the listener right now, if you should be listening to this episode right now on YouTube and you scroll down to the description, I have a live link where you can listen to some of these Nanji audios. So you can go right away and listen. And it's very healing to hear these words back and forth from husband and wife. And yes, even across the veil, but you'll really get it that your loved one, whoever that may be, is still with you. So anyways.
And this summer, last summer, I had the honor of meeting Stig over in Copenhagen, which is a big story. We can't go into it, but I met him, which was surprising. And this summer, I just met Carl Jackson Barnes. Yes,
I'm jealous.
In Scotland. I was in Ireland. I traveled. We had together, and he told me 2 things that are really important. I learned 2 things from Carl that are key in all of this, trying to feel better when you are longing so much. He said, number 1 is patience, and he told that refers back to the recording with Leslie Flint, where he waited for half an hour and nothing happened.
Right.
So just be patient. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with your loved one, and all of that. Just be patient. Take a breath. And something else that was interesting from Carl was, I said to him, sometimes I lament the fact that some of my nearest and dearest are not on board with this, and it's hard to share my enthusiasm for it with them. And Carl said, I don't share it with people. I don't, unless he knows they're like-minded.
That's right.
But he said, I just don't. And I think that can, you want so much to be so excited to share it, like with the people that you're closest to. But if they're not on board, it can be very discouraging. And the last thing we need is any sort of discouragement. So just bless them and let them have their own path, and share with the people who are going to go hip, hip, hooray. So those are 2 little tips.
Good words.
As for William, not mine, but yes, good words. As for William and me, William Murray is a person, I hope he doesn't mind me talking about him, but he's on the afterlife, many of the afterlife groups, and he was married to his wife, Irene, soulmates. They were married for many years. over 20 years together. And Irene passed from cancer as well. And he wrote a book that's online. It's called Love After Life. It's an Amazon book that's available for $2.99, like really minimal amount.
Mm-hmm.
But he also has a blog, and if you Google his name, William Murray, Murray, and blog, it'll come up. Love After Life is his blog, and the book is available as a PDF for free on his website, on his blog page, if you want to look at that. So William and I were on these other afterlife groups and began to gravitate toward each other, as law of attraction will have people who are like-minded gravitate toward each other. And William began to first he described how the grief was so incredibly searing. It was horrible for him. He was having panic attacks. He was throwing up. He couldn't imagine life without his Irene.
Right.
And they have 6 children between the two of them. And, he wasn't ready to take himself out. And so William, though, is very smart. He's like my mentor. And he and I both agreed, in our own heads, not with we hadn't even communicated, but we were in agreement with this fact that there is no death. And that if we were going to feel our loved ones around us, we had to lift ourselves up out of that deep, deep grief. And William's, his learning was a little bit different than mine. I've learned from a lot of different teachers, but much of our teachings were the same that we brought to this grief experience. And William decided, which I think was brilliant, that when he noticed that when he felt Irene's presence around him, it would feel good for a millisecond, and then that grief would kick in. And he began saying to her out loud, Irene, don't stop coming near me. Let me handle my own grief. I want to feel your love. And he allowed himself to feel it more and more and more and more. And he kept this blog. And in the blog, he started saying, hey, you know what? It's been, 3 weeks. I haven't really felt too much. I haven't felt that searing. Of course, I still long for her, but it's not as bad. And eventually he realized he had eradicated it. And he did it in his book. He has a number of, I guess you could call them action steps that he took to really eradicate the grief. And meanwhile, on my own, irrespective of what William was doing, I was doing similar things. And we found together that we're more in love with our crossed over sweethearts than even we were when they were here. And William says that's part of the purpose of grief. He said, imagine when we get there, how fabulous that reunion, how amazing that reunion. And so he and I kind of, many of the other grief groups, the traditional grief groups online, or people, and they're all well-intended, Sandra, but so many of them really ascribe to the notion that, yes, you love your loved one, yes, you can communicate with them, yes, you can feel better, but you're always going to have that hole in your heart. And William and I didn't feel that. And so we kind of broke off and did our own thing. And we have a Facebook group called Love After Life, and we have a Zoom room meeting where we meet every week at 3 to 4 New York time. But we have people all around the world who come. And now William and I just sort of sit back and they all kind of talk to each other about, can you imagine this amazing this and this amazing that? And William and I don't like to speak for other people, but I know from talking to him that we really believe that the most paramount thing is to believe that every single thing that happens to you is for your own benefit, including your partner's cancer and including death.
Right.
Every single thing is for your own benefit. And if you can find the parts to appreciate, I know it sounds so, Pollyanna-ish. But if you can find the parts to appreciate, which is different from gratitude. Gratitude is, thank you, thank you, thank you. I would never say that for cancer or Paul's passing, by the way.
Right.
But there are things I can appreciate about it.
That's right.
About those things. And if you can find the parts you can appreciate, if you can begin to support yourself from the inside out and do whatever is necessary to make yourself feel better and better and better and better, then you can feel your loved one with you. And I feel Paul with me all the time. It's funny. I almost feel him coming and going the way you would in a normal situation. Like he went to work and I went to work and then we came back together and had dinner. He's not with me every single second of the day, but there's times where he just kind of whooshes in and I say, oh, thank you. That's the other thing. William says, thank you to everything. people will say, I had the craziest dream last night. I dreamt that my husband in spirit went off and doesn't love me anymore. And William would say, that's your husband visiting, mixed in with your fears.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So thank your husband for coming in your and say, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so fearful about so many other things. Thank you for showing up. And I promise I'm going to try and feel better. So next time you show up, it's easier for you to get through. So there's nothing that shows up on William's radar, and I'm practiced as well at this, or my radar as something horrible, tragic, disgusting, hideous. Nothing. It's all good. And it's all for our benefit. And the afterlife is real. Our loved ones are right there. They're right here. The afterlife is all about us. It's not anywhere far off. It's not up in the heavens or anything. It's right here. And so that's what we tell people. And here's another thing. William said, you know what? If at the end of our life, let's say we close our eyes and there's nothing. Well, there's not going to be anybody there to say, ha, you were wrong. And I would rather live my rest of my life with Irene in my heart and in my life and in my thoughts and in my actions than not have her with me. And so that's the way I've chosen to live my life as well.
That's beautiful. And with 271 now episodes of this show, I do believe we close our eyes and we open them and everybody's there, including our animals, our loved ones.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. It's not even do I think
yes.
we go on. It's like I know we go on. Mary Beth, you have been a phenomenal guest. You saying you're just a regular person, as am I, but I do think it is your journey, your pain, your experiences, your interests, your taking the time to go out searching. And now I tell you, I think you're raising your vibrations also by giving back and going through all these many tapes and writing the book and sharing and speaking. And I can't even imagine how many people who have lost their soulmates or think they have lost them, that you're able to reunite and give them hope. So thank you for that.
Well, and it's changed my view on death, of course. I mean, I had another loved one, my ex-mother-in-law, grandma to my kids, just recently passed. It was sad. I mean, I love her dearly, but I know she's perfectly well and happy and young and fine. And so it takes the bite out of death. The death experience when someone you love dies, when you know these things. It still hurts, but it's not so horrible.
Right. And
it's doable. And we're all in this together. And it happens to almost virtually, like I said, unless you die when you're, very, 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 very young, it happens to all of us eventually. So I think that, this community and your offerings, your radio show, and everybody who contributes in all their many different ways, it's not a horrible, hideous thing. It's a very exciting, invigorating, wonderful, sparkling, wondrous world to be in the world of afterlife. And so I'm so glad that Paul ushered me into this. Yes. I love Paul.
Yeah. And can anyone that's lost a loved one, I hate to use the word lost because they're not lost.
No, right.
Can they be part of your group?
Yes, anybody can. Well, yes, as long as they have, like, for example, some people come to us and said, my son died, and we gently and gracefully decline them because we are not experts. We have no notion about what it's like when a child passes. That's a whole different kettle of fish. And so William and I wouldn't even begin to address that. And William goes out of his way every single time he speaks or talks to say to people, in my opinion, in my experience,
That's right.
in my own knowing, this may not be your knowing.
That's right.
But William just recently had, go ahead.
No, you finish.
No, I was going to say William just recently had, he had an astral projection with Irene that he's talking about, in the groups and things like that. So I don't think it's a secret. And he now is convinced more than ever. He went and met with her. And so that's so exciting. I haven't had that happen, but he'll say, here's how it happened for me. I don't know that this is going to be your path. I don't know. Here's what happened for me. I'll share it with you, but I am not you. And so you might not have an astral projection no matter how hard you try, because that may not be in the cards for you. I'm not sure exactly how none of us are sure exactly how every single thing works. We don't know how every single thing works here on Earth, So we always give that caveat that it's not, our experience may not be exactly your experience. But I will tell you that it's beneficial always, no matter what your circumstances, to always reach for something that feels better, 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 better. That does serve. That does serve you and people around you.
We can always learn and take nuggets from anything, even if we don't buy into everything we hear. But the name of your Facebook group, am I correct that it's Forever in Love with Our Partners Who Have Crossed Over?
No, that's not our group. That's
Okay.
a different group.
Okay.
Our group is Love Afterlife.
Oh, well, that's much easier to type out anyways.
Yes.
Love.
Yes. And by the way,
Afterlife.
I want to say, Sandra, what you just said.
Yeah.
About William and I also have, we have our own things, but we also advise people, take it or leave it, but we also advise people that in the world of the afterlife, you're going to hear things that don't resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
And William and I, in an effort to keep our vibration high and happy and loving, if I hear a piece of information that doesn't sound right to me, I just throw it out. I don't even pay any attention to it. I don't worry. I did in the past. I would read stuff and it would throw me for a loop. I'd be sobbing out loud. Now I think, well, that doesn't resonate with me, and I just discard it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's sticking my head in the sand. I don't know, but I don't care.
It's okay. Take what empowers you, and that goes for any information you get from anybody, whether it's on one of these episodes, a book you read. Don't throw the whole thing out because of one thing. Take what empowers you, because we are each on our own individual journey. And just one thing about your Facebook group, I have no problem that you are communicating with people who are interested in the transdimensional love life. And there are great groups like Helping Parents Heal that work with grieving parents. And if you're not a grieving parent, that's may not be the group for you, because it is specialized and there are so many, so much other information for grievers.
And it's possible that some of the tenets and some of the things that we share are useful for those people, but we just we really feel like that's way out of our element. That's not, we don't have that. Willie and I are only working on our own experience and what works for us and what's been helpful for us. That's what we can share knowledgeably. But my children are here. I haven't lost a child, and so I can't speak responsibly in any way, manner, or form to anyone who has, for example, lost a child, but yet there are groups who can.
Who do, yeah. And if someone's listening right now, and on one of these episodes we have not covered your particular area of grief, I can 99.9% guarantee you that I know someone to connect you with, or a Facebook group. So feel free to write me, sandrachamplain@gmail.com, and I will be able to connect you with the right group or several of them. But Mary Beth, it's time for us to say our final words. As I knew it would go by fast, but do you have a couple of final words you want to share, and then I will close out the interview.
Yeah, one of the little, I have all these different little axioms and things and little affirmations. I mean, some of William's affirmations are things like, Irene, you and I are together. Irene, we are in love. I know you're right here. He constantly would reassure himself that way. And in his book, he has all of them listed, so you can go and read his book for free. But one of the little sayings I love that I often say to myself that I picked up in some little wacky book that actually talked to you about how you can prepare a body for death yourself, which I wasn't intending to do.
Yeah.
But I had a little quote in the beginning of the book, and it said, "Marry, meet, MERRY, marry, meet, and marry part, and marry, meet again."
Oh.
And that's, for me, that sums up life. Marry, meet, marry, part, marry, meet again. I met Paul when I was a teenager. We parted ways. I met him again when I was an adult. We came together for a full, fabulous relationship. We parted in a certain way when he took off for the flip side, and we will meet again. And that's true for everyone.
Oh,
I love that. It's just so buoyant and happy, and I like cheerful things. Marry, meet, and marry, part, and marry, meet again. And Sandra, I will marry, meet again with you.
We're going to marry, meet very soon, because it's less than a month away to the Afterlife Symposium. And for our listener, not too late to sign up. There's still some spots left. You can go to afterlifesymposium.org to find out more. Also on the website, they're going to live stream some of the speakers, not all. There's about 50 speakers that will be there. So it'll be a big, big, big event. And yeah, and I will probably do some live streams from the event to introduce you to some of the speakers face to face. I think that's going to be exciting. As a reminder,
Excellent.
our home base, yeah, I'm excited, is We Don't Die Radio. There's a lot of freebies there, including my free audio called How to Survive Grief. I've got a PDF file called 19 Reasons to Believe in the Afterlife. And although it says you'll get several chapters from my book, We Don't Die, it's actually the whole book in PDF form. Yes, I know. And as a reminder, just below this episode, I have included the links to the non-G tapes, also to William Murray's blog, and to your Facebook group, Love Afterlife, to make it easy for people.
Thank you so much.
And if you're not listening on YouTube, you can easily go to, you just type in We Don't Die Radio 271 and you'll find this episode. So Mary Beth, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't wait to meet you. And it's all good. We're really, it was a great time. It was a great time. And to come to the symposium, there's so much I didn't even get to. I have like reams of stuff to share. So yeah, there will be more.
Yeah, and you will be speaking on Friday, September 14th, 11:45 to 12:30. I think I'm actually speaking at 2:30 that very same day.
Yes, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to see you.
Oh, you're so great. Well, thank you to our listener also for being with us for this interview, for many interviews, however many you listen to. Thank you. Your life is important. I wish we had all the answers. I don't have the answer for why grief has to hurt so much or why we have some of the struggles, but I do know, and Mary Beth is just a testament to this, is that sometimes grief can crack you wide open and actually allow the spiritual side of yourself to grow. Not only looking for answers, but for like who you are and what your life is for. And I am taking more than anything away from this episode, not to wait for things to happen, but make things happen. Be proactive. Give your loved ones who are in the spirit world a sign from you to them. And I love that. And talk to them as if they're still here, because they are. Pour them a cup of coffee. You don't necessarily need to buy a gift, but present them to something you would give to them. Keep that relationship alive from your point of view, and I think you'll be mystified at the signs that end up coming through. So with that, this is Sandra Champlain, and I've been your host on We Don't Die Radio. And I do believe with all my heart that life is an education for the soul, and that your life here on earth is important. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.